launch of the recommendations of the Lancaster District Climate Change People's Jury. I'm Lizette, and on behalf of my jury colleagues, I will be guiding you through the programme of tonight's launch. By the end of this evening, you'll hopefully have a better understanding of why and how the People's Jury was put together, but most importantly, you will have listened to and have the opportunity to discuss how we can all contribute to implementing our recommendations later in the evening. I'd now like to hand you over to Councillor Erica Lewis, Leader of the Council, to explain why a People's Jury was organised.
Thank you, Lizette, and thank you to everybody who's here tonight, and especially the members of the jury. So on the 30th of January 2019, Lancaster City Council declared a climate emergency, and within the text of that declaration was a commitment to set up a People's Jury. The reason that councillors at that time, because it was before I was elected, councillors thought that it was important that there be a People's Jury, and I agree with them, is that often the debate about climate change and the climate emergency can sound like the same people talking to themselves. And what we know as a council is that if we are to meet the climate emergency, we need not only us to act, but for as many people across the district and as many businesses and as many organisations and institutions across the district to act as possible. So in putting together a People's Jury works as a mini public. It brings together a version of our district, you know, taking into account age, gender, disability status, where you live in the district, what kind of education background you have, and importantly for this discussion, how you felt about the question of climate change before you came into the jury. And so it's a process of letting residents, encouraging residents to talk to and hear from experts, not all of whom agree, but who present different opportunities, and for those residents to distill down and bring forward what they think are the most important things. And so it's really important that this evening's event is led by members of the jury, and having had a preview of what you'll hear tonight, it's a real privilege to hear the journey and the thinking and the work that they've done, because they've worked hard in a process that started as kind of people meeting face to face in a room, and you've seen some of the photos already, for COVID to disrupt all of those processes, for some people to adapt to new technology in order to continue with the process. We're very grateful that members of the jury kind of persevered through the difficulties of the pandemic in order to get us here. Throughout the process, we and our jury have been supported by a local social enterprise called Shared Future, who recruited our jury members and has supported them through the process and in the production of these recommendations and tonight's launch. The council itself has its next regular council meeting on December the 16th, and there will be a report to council that presents the recommendations to the People's Jury and makes the commitment to examine them all and to come back with what our commitment is to action on that. That commitment will involve further discussion with members of the jury, our local communities and businesses, and I know that some of the cabinet members are already very keen to talk to members of the jury about their recommendations and how they might impact on their portfolio. So I want to thank everybody for coming, and I want to especially say thank you to all the members of the jury and to Shared Futures for all the work that you have put in to bring us to this place. And I hope that you can help us to answer the question, what do we need to do in our homes, neighbourhoods and our district in order to meet the challenge of climate change? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Hello and good evening, everybody. So how did we recruit people? In order to assemble members for the People's Jury, some 4,000 addresses in the area were selected at random from the Royal Mail database. Each household received an invitation to volunteer to take part in the Lancaster District Climate Change People's Jury. Interestingly, out of the initial 4,000 letters sent, the response was less than 10%, and whilst this made it easier to narrow down the final selection process even further, it also makes you wonder what made the remaining 90% not want to take part and why. Obviously, we cannot answer this as that information is not available, but hopefully the contributing factor to their decision was not an indifference to climate change. Out of the responses received, a total of 30 spaces would be available in the jury group. However, in order to gain a diverse range of people to fill those places, the final selection process would be based on criteria that was considered fair, unbiased, and represented a good cross-section of society. All of this process was undertaken by the Sortition Foundation, who are an independent, not-for-profit organisation that promotes the use of stratified, random selection in decision-making. From a personal point of view, when I originally applied to go on the jury, one of the questions asked was my attitude to climate change. At that time, I put myself in the middle, neither passionate nor complacent. I did my bit, I recycled, but I was also cynical about other aspects of it. I took the view that a lot of schemes were purely all about making money, all in the name of climate change. Being on the People's Jury has opened my eyes to many things, but if nothing else, it has made me more aware, and along with my family, I will carry on doing what I can to improve my carbon footprint. Finally, having never taken part in a project such as this before, I jokingly wondered if we would be judge, jury and executioners, and ironically we have. We have judged everything put forward to us. We as a jury have examined the evidence and drawn our conclusion, and we have executed our decision. However, there is an irony to all of this too. Please do not let each and every one of us be the executioners of our wonderful planet by not taking action now. Thank you for listening, and I will now hand you over to Matt.
Thanks, Julie. So the question we were tasked with was, what do we need to do in our homes, neighbourhood and district to respond to the emergency of climate change? I'm going to hand over to Malcolm, who's going to give you a little bit of information about why he got involved in the process.
Okay, 69, retired, born and bred in Lancaster. I've lived here all my life and I do not expect this to change. My initial interest in climate change was as a skeptic. Choosing to be a skeptic is probably taking the easy option. You don't imagine there being a price to pay for not meeting targets that are set so far in the future. I was your typical meat-eating, car-driving international holidaymaker that did not realise what effect my actions were making. With a diverse selection of presenters that pointed out what we'll have to alter to safeguard the future, my opinion has changed. COVID-19 has shown what can be achieved if the will is there, and the same resolve will be needed for climate change action. Listening to the presenters, I've become aware that there is a major problem looming, but this will probably come at a cost, personally and financially, to myself. The saying, "It is difficult to teach an old dog new tricks," is true, but what it does not say, it is still possible. After many sessions, presentations and discussions with fellow members of the jury, I now believe we have a major problem. This will not be solved by one person, but will need a collective effort. I will be very interested to see what Lancaster City Council do with our suggestions. My hope is they will either adopt or adapt some of them for the benefit of the district. Thank you. I would now like to introduce you to Mark, who will tell you about his personal story and his journey. Mark.
Hello everyone, I'm Mark. A bit about me. I've lived in Morecambe my entire life. I commute to work in Kendal. I go on a couple of holidays every year overseas, but sadly not this year. And I'm a confirmed meat eater as well. I got involved in climate jury for two reasons. Firstly, I felt this would be an opportunity to improve my local community. And secondly, I wanted to educate myself about climate change. Prior to the climate change jury, I'd been a bit turned off about the climate change debate by some of the messaging I'd heard. So Greta Thunberg, Extinction Rebellion, critical mass for instance, are all very loud voices, but sometimes the shouting and protesting doesn't resonate with everybody. And that hadn't resonated with me. So I did recognise there was a climate change issue. I wasn't a total skeptic, but I really wanted to educate myself and genuinely look at the evidence properly. And I've got to say, the jury's been a fantastic experience for me in this area. For instance, I started the process thinking that the climate emergency was an overstatement, particularly the word emergency, which is very dramatic and very emotive. But I have to say, as I listened to the evidence and the evidence revealed itself, my view totally flipped on its head. There was an absolute genuinely need to act quickly to avoid some really big problems and slow down some of the problems that have already started. And finally, I always felt it was really important to put forward sensible, deliverable recommendations that the average person on the street can get behind, the small wins that don't turn people's lives upside down, and where we can take people with us en masse. So that's exactly what I've started doing at work and at home. So I have a small team that I lead in work in Kendal. We've done some very simple things like just making sure that the recycling bins are labelled up properly and everyone knows what to put in the recycling bins. And that meant the recycling had gone from virtually nothing to about 80% of our office waste being recycled. And personally, I try not to buy overpackaged products as I may have done previously, and thinking about better meal planning, perhaps not always having as much meat in my diet. So that's what I've done really as a result of my journey in this experience. So I'm now going to hand over to Jenny. I think she's going to read Maureen's story. Maureen can't be with us tonight, but Jenny's going to read that for us.
Thank you, Mark. Yep, Maureen sent through the words that she's prepared, so I'm going to read them on her behalf. I am Lancaster born and bred, now living in Morecambe. In 2014, I had to take early retirement due to ill health. This had a massive impact on my mental health. In January 2020, I decided this was the year to take myself out of my comfort zone and try new things. Alas, not many new things tried due to the pandemic and lockdown. When I received the information about the People's Jury, I thought, why not? I won't get picked. Lo and behold, I got picked. I was tempted to turn it down, but didn't. I'm so glad that I didn't turn it down, as I've learnt so much from these sessions. I thought climate change was something just to deal with, not the emergency it clearly is. I've been privileged to listen to some very good speakers. Some I may not necessarily agree with wholeheartedly, but respect their opinion and passion, and have learnt a great deal from them. I look forward to following the council on our recommendations. I'd now like to hand over to Chris.
Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Williams-Ashburn. I'm born and bred in South Africa. I was very blessed to grow up in a family where we used to fix things before just throwing them away. And going on holidays in game parks and mountains, I grew to love the wildlife and the environment and the planet that we live on. I've been living in Morecambe for 3 years now and consider it my new home. It is a beautiful town, albeit very neglected. I volunteered for the Citizens Climate Change Jury because I wanted to find out more about this climate change emergency. I'd heard about it, but never really thought much about it. Being on the jury has had a big impact on me. Before, I used to think it was just power stations, factories, pumping smoke into the sky, or diesel trucks belching out clouds of smoke that was destroying the planet. To hear from the commentators about what the main causes of carbon emissions are has really woken me up. Finding out that 1/3 of all food produced is wasted has shocked me. I try and be a lot wiser now when I go shopping. I think a lot more about what I'm buying. I love shopping for the reduced items at Morrison's and other supermarkets, but I'm more selective about what I buy now, as I don't want to waste food by buying it just because it's cheap. I do a lot of litter picking on the street around where I live, and it's quite frustrating picking up all the empty plastic bottles and cans to throw away, knowing that in South Africa there are people that survive and feed their families just by collecting the very same items and selling them to the recycling centres. Walking to the shops with a friend one day, he pulled something out of his pocket and threw it on the ground. And straight away he bent down and picked it up and apologised to me. I had to chuckle and felt chuffed that my litter picking had an impact on at least one person. And I get a big sense of joy out of when I pass young children whilst picking up litter, and they run to pick up some litter to throw into my trolley that I've made. It's all about each one teaching one. It's about living by example. Being on the jury has made me realise that it is not only the government and councils and big corporations' job to sort out the climate change emergency. It is all of our duty to try and protect and save our environment, as we have all in one way or another contributed to the problem. We all have to help, otherwise there will be nothing left on our beautiful planet for the children and their children. Learning about the climate change emergency has also made me a lot bolder. I felt quite entitled to go to the Royal Mail depot to ask them to please tell the postman not to throw the elastic bands onto the ground, or approach people on the beach and promenade to ask them if I may throw their rubbish in the bin. Before, I wasn't really interested in trying to save the planet. Now I'm very keen to help because I have heard what needs to be done. And people, being sheeple, need to be shown and told. It is encouraging that the council has approached the public for recommendations about what can be done, because at the end of the day, the council are supposed to be working for the people. Thank you. I'll hand you over to Charlotte now for her story.
Thanks, Chris. That was great. So like Chris said, my name's Charlotte. I'm 26. My home is near Lancaster train station. My parents live locally as well. I've also lived in Manchester, which is where I studied. I'm an optometrist. My long-term boyfriend, Tom, lives in Ulverston, so I spend plenty of time in the lakes as well. I was already trying my best to be kind to the planet, eating less meat, composting and recycling, when the letter to join the People's Jury came through. I wanted to improve my knowledge, but I also wanted to meet some new people and have a look at what they thought. And everyone has been great, including the facilitators. Going forward, I'll continue to make as much difference as I can myself, whilst hopefully maintaining a relationship with the council so that we can make a wider impact as well. Tom and I haven't decided if we will have children yet, but if we do, I want them to know that it's important to be kind to each other and kind to the planet. And we can only do that by setting an example. Thank you, and I'll pass back to the set.
Thank you all for sharing your personal stories. We're now going to hear about what happened in the sessions, and I'll hand you over to Mick.
Many thanks, Lisette. How do everyone? I'm Mick. I'm a Yorkshire lad born and bred. I was selected to be part of the Lancaster District People's Jury. I'm just going to give you all a brief introduction to the first People's Jury session. All jury members were given a name badge, well, a sticker with our names on it, written on it. It was almost like being back at school again. Tea, coffee and other drinks, biscuits, etc. was on offer, which gave us, the jury and facilitators, a chance to mingle before social distancing. I'd brief hellos without being too formal. Well, seats, which was in a shape like a horseshoe, which wasn't as formal as sitting in rows. The facilitators had held a brief overview of what's going to be discussed at the meetings. A timetable of when the meetings were being held, which had to be extended till now. When the submitting their recommendations, also which commentators could be attending. The facilitators has also told the jury which various organisations are on the overview panel, which selected the commentators. Councillor Kevin Frey introduced himself and what his role is in the Lancaster City Council. He also spoke on why he thought it was good to have a People's Jury on climate emergency. The jurors then had a game of bingo, which is an excellent icebreaker. How could you approach someone of a certain age and ask them if they could do the splits, or even if they could touch their nose with their tongue? Only other people's jury. With our first small group session, which split the big group into sections of parts of Lancaster district's areas to where we lived. The session involved using green and red post-it notes. Green highlighted helping climate change, red highlighted not helping climate change. The session was coming to a close. There was a drawing of a tree and roots of the post-it notes from each of the small groups was pinned to the roots to highlight where those groups thought was on the climate change emergency in the Lancaster district. A huge sigh of relief by all, and I'll see you all next week. And that was the end of the first session. Thanks for listening, and I will hand you over to Will.
Thank you. We then moved to short presentations. Evenings where there were 2 speakers, we gave them 25 minutes each. And when we moved to 5 speakers, they had 10 minutes or so. Red cards were introduced to stop business speak and acronyms being used so everyone could understand plain English. There were small group discussions. We talked amongst ourselves and also with visiting commentators. And then we came back in together all and had a question and answer session. Next slide, please. I won't go through all the names. I'll let you have a brief look at them all. And tools to reduce emissions, and the speakers were mainly, as you can see, from Lancaster University. Next, if it's not too soon. Thank you. We picked out 3 topics that were really burning issues from the post-it sessions. They were transport, food and farming, and housing. Here you'll see a list of the 5 speakers who came to the transport evening, and they talked about local solutions, how to reduce bus carbon emissions, and we heard about the Lancaster City Council policy. Next, thank you. We then moved on to housing, which the jury had chosen, and we heard about different aspects of design, development and planning. And I say a range of speakers here from Holton Co-Housing, Taylor Wimpey, Loon Properties, and again, the City Council. Next, thank you. Food and farming, again, we had 5 speakers, which were all very interesting and had different aspects to discuss. We heard also about the big difference in emissions between cooking steak, chicken, and a tin of beans. Thank you. We then, I'll come back to how we got here, but obviously we moved on to online sessions in June. And we heard from Erica Lewis about her remit and portfolio. Mike Davies talked about the City Climate Change Action Plan. Thank you. And final session 6 was more of a resume. We had chats from Belfast, Vaxio in Sweden, which was chosen 25 years ago to reach 0% emissions in fossil fuels by 2030. And again, Lancaster City Council and other institutions came along to chat to us. Thank you. I'll now pass on to Carl.
Thanks, Will. So how were the topics chosen? In the early sessions and after our introductions, we undertook a speed dating activity where we were able to discuss with another jury member our personal climate change concerns. 2 rows of seats were laid out and we sat opposite each other, where we had 2 minutes to inform the other member sat opposite our thoughts, concerns and ideas about climate change. We then listened to the opposite jury's members' thoughts, concerns and ideas after our time was up, and then we moved right to repeat the exercise and discuss this with another member of the group. Here we were able to understand each other's concerns in a simple, effective communication exercise. After this, we were able to put our ideas and thoughts down on large posters via post-it notes of varying green, amber and red colours, which showed pictorially how serious or not climate change meant to us now and how it possibly could impact us in the very near future. In the following 3 jury sessions, we were introduced to professional group guest speakers from differing areas that climate change could affect or was affecting in an area relating to climate change research. Again, after the guest speakers had finished, the jury members discussed what we had just heard and how we all felt about it, whether good or bad. During the reflection activity, we were all encouraged to think of questions relating to the subject we had just heard about, so that we could put these questions to the guest speakers at the end of the night in the final question and answer session. We also during this time jotted down our thoughts onto a post-it note and popped them onto the posters relating to the different issues we were all concerned about. Once all the guest speakers and reflection activities had finished, full group discussions were held, and here we were asked as a group to vote on the climate change areas we as public citizens thought concerned us the most and which ones we wish to hear more from. The 4 were transport, housing, food farming, waste recycling, education, community and leadership. After the 4 topics were chosen by the jury, Shared Future were then able to identify suitable professional speakers within that subject area to come along as guest speakers and discuss to us in a controlled discussion. Each speaker was able to give his own opinions on how this area was reducing, contributing or developing ways to reduce the impact on climate change. With this information, we as the jury were then able to start discussing and then writing our climate change recommendations. And that's all for me. So if I'd like to hand you back to Will, please.
Thank you. We were chugging along nicely, having had 6 sessions, when all of a sudden we did hit a showstopper in that COVID in mid-March meant we had to discontinue. And so it came to Zoom. Many of you are now become familiar with this all of a sudden, whether you'd wanted to or not. After it was ensured that everyone had laptops, Jane coached to help everyone who wasn't so techie inclined. And by mid-June, we were able to resume and get back up to speed so that everyone can now put themselves on mute, sorry about that, rename themselves, and away we went. Alas, without any more free biscuits. And I'll pass you back to Jenny. I think
it's me, Will.
Sorry.
Don't worry.
I wasn't sure who was taking it.
So as Will and Carl have explained, then by this stage, we've gathered a lot of evidence. We've had, hours and hours of evidence laid out in front of us. So really at this point, we come to the point of the exercise, which was writing the recommendations. So it was important that we narrowed it down. And as we were going through our recommendations, it became apparent that it was broadly splitting into the parts that you see there on the screen: shopping and waste and recycling, transport, a big picture which centered a lot around council and local politics and COVID, the food and farming, the communications and education, the housing, and other recommendations, a few other recommendations that didn't really sit in any of those. So essentially what we did then, we were on Zoom at this stage, and we split into small groups, and we basically discussed our recommendations, put in recommendations, and then over the course of, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks, we were there. Some people were championing certain recommendations and things that they were really passionate about. Other people were challenging and going back to the evidence and saying, well, what about this evidence, and challenging. And that led to a sort of refining of the recommendations, and it all boiled down, but it's all coming back to reviewing the evidence and boiling down the recommendations into the recommendations now that you see in the report. And then finally, there was a vote on those recommendations to sort of prioritise them, which I think someone else is going to talk about shortly. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone. You're now going to hear the top 5 recommendations, but first I'd like to invite Meg to read out our jury statement.
So this is the statement written collaboratively by the jury to accompany our recommendations. We are facing a climate change emergency, which makes us concerned and worried about the future. We've heard from a range of experts, and we now believe that if we take immediate action, we have the tools and the hope that we can address this emergency. We believe that the only suitable response will be one that brings many organisations and individuals together to work collectively, not separately. This is bigger than Lancaster. We recognise that many difficult decisions lie ahead, but we must act immediately and not allow a quest for perfection to get in the way of making progress. We need to take action today, not in 30 years' time. A journey starts with a small step which all of us can achieve. The people of the Lancaster district need to see confident leadership, positive changes made, and a clear plan for the future. Our city and county councils must accept that progressive action to fight the climate change emergency will have financial implications. Not being able to fund the recommendations we have listed here is no reason for inaction, as money won't matter in a world that won't exist as we know it. The response to the climate emergency needs to be one that moves away from politicians making all the decisions, but instead reaches out to the public and wide communities for ideas on how to achieve our recommendations. It's time for our councils to listen to the people of Lancaster and District and take action now, leading the way to make changes in response to this emergency. Thank you. Now we have Matt to explain how we voted on the recommendations. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Meg. So first off, we're all sent the final set of recommendations and asked to show our level of support for each recommendation on a scale from strongly support through to strongly oppose. We're also asked to write a couple of sentences explaining our choice, and we then return these to Shared Future, who calculate the scores, and they put them all the information into the jury's final report. That leads us on to the top 5, so a brief overview of the top 5 recommendations. So there are 2 recommendations sharing 3rd place, both scoring 38 points. The first of which is that we felt that there should be a strong campaign to convince people to take action. This should not be based upon shocking people into changing their ways, but instead should be community-led, regular, empowering, positive, and focus on the positive effects of such changes on the community as well as the climate, so giving people control back in our changing world.
Also in 3rd place, scoring 38 points, the council should fully support the Sustainable Food Place Partnership and sign up to the Global Declaration, i.e. the C40 Good Food Cities Declaration, which includes a range of commitments, including ensuring that when governments or other public institutions directly purchase food that is served in schools, hospitals, etc., those meals must be healthy and sustainable and supporting an overall increase of healthy plant-based food consumption. I will now hand you over to Meg.
Yep. There are 2 recommendations sharing 2nd place, both scoring 40 points. The council to work with local partners to reduce waste from households and businesses, including commit to single-use plastic, support and promote reuse and encourage a make and mend approach, promote and commission community leadership initiatives that encourage the sharing of resources, deliver community education initiatives for cooking, upcycling and repurposing, give households composting bins to make recycling easier, investigate and invest in local technology to turn methane from waste into energy, and ban all plastic bags with only reusable options available. And now I'm going to hand over to Adam for the next one.
Yes, 2nd place is the council should frame all their work in the context of the climate change emergency, only as it was done in response to the COVID-19. There must be a stronger recognition of the problem at the government level. A, climate change should be a permanent agenda item at every council meeting. B, councillors should take part in the climate change training programme so they have the knowledge needed to address the issue. C, we must ensure all action on the climate change is not disputed by party politics. The council should investigate how we can ensure that the action on the climate change happens of changes of elections. A long-term plan, initially for 10 years to 2030, should be agreed with cross-party support. Next.
In first place, in brief, local schools must educate young people about climate change. It must become part of the curriculum. Host schools need to have an accredited climate change teacher. Teachers and children should explore the need to be taught basic skills weekly. All schools should have an active allotment. Intergenerational community projects should be set up. Back to Lizette.
Thank you all. As guests, you'll already have received a link to access our full list of recommendations, and we hope you've had the chance to read through them. We're now going to take a 5-minute break, and when we come back, you'll be put into the first of your discussion groups. Just as a reminder, if you haven't already chosen yet, they are A, transport, B, housing, C, food, farming, waste and recycling, and D, communications, education and council leadership.